My sister OD'd and died. Her daughter found her lying on the dining room floor with a bottle of pills. I wonder if things would have been different without the stigma. Emma used booze, pot, and meth in high school. After graduating from high school, she left home for more than 6 months. No one knew where she was. No one knew what she was doing. No one knew if she was safe. And no one openly talked about it. One day, she simply called and asked for airfare to come home. When she had the first of her failed back surgeries, prescription opioids invaded her body and mind. And when the pain continued, the doctors simply prescribed more pills to this now known addict. The trusted small town family doctor said that her spinal afflictions were the result of her falling down when she was drunk, which she did, but he totally misdiagnosed the actual cause. And he just couldn't see beyond the drunk and the addict. He couldn't see this beautiful person. He couldn't see beyond the stigma. Emma called the same family doctor one time when I was with her, and she asked him to help her get into a rehab facility. She was ready. I listened as he said, "Oh, Emma, it's Sunday, and I just got home from church with my family. Call me after the office opens tomorrow." Emma ran to her room and slammed the door. To this doctor, she was simply someone who had made bad choices in her life. She was an embarrassment. It was an embarrassment with 2 kids and an empty refrigerator. Well, AA didn't work. The first intervention failed. She was kicked out of her first residential treatment program for smuggling in alcohol. But on the 3rd day of a marathon heart-to-heart, as I talked, pleaded, cajoled, simply exhausting all of my ideas, from out of the blue, I promised Emma that I would paint her portrait if she promised to go to rehab. She agreed. And for 5 years, she seemed to be in recovery. It was wonderful to see her laugh, smile, work in the garden, go fishing with us. But then her beautiful husband died. Then more back surgeries, more pills. She relapsed, she died. That was 9 years ago, almost to the day. In 65, I was 17, and I wanted to be an artist. For various reasons, I did not. 40 years later, I quit the best job I ever had to become a full-time painter. I figured I was still young enough to start a new career, and why not do what I wanted to do when I was 17? At this stage in my life, I could afford to define success in my way, but it took a few years to recognize my mission and artistic direction, to find my voice. Well, my voice found me, and it was in the back of my head whispering, "What good is your art? What does it really accomplish? Does it even matter?" So then I started to broadly explore victims and survivors of war, discrimination, violence, abuse, bigotry, addiction, and the list went on. And viewers interpreted my work within their own subjective context, related to their own experiences. And this is exactly what I wanted. But again, that little voice whispered in the back of my head, "How can you honestly relate to all of these issues?" Well, I can't. But I can relate to addiction, not as a victim, but as a witness, and I know about stigma. Families are embarrassed, communities judge, doctors are dismissive, and the addicts think they are not worthy, worse yet, evil. Stigma is a barrier to prevention, diagnosis, treatment, and recovery. So stigma became the very tight focus of my art. Emma, my sister, OD'd, but maybe to the millions affected, I could be part of a solution, and stigma was the place for me to start. With alcohol and drug abuse, it's never just one person that's impacted. And so the faces I now paint are the faces of those affected, the victims, the witnesses, and the survivors. I think the first step to alleviating stigma is helping people understand that substance use disorders are a treatable medical condition and not a moral failing. When people come to my shows now, they are passionate about the work. They react passionately. They share their heartfelt stories. They paint a picture of suffering, terror, anger, chaos, and helplessness. But they also describe resilience, forgiveness, and hope, and that drives me. Some say they intend to take that first step to finally start that intervention that they've been delaying. Some, and this is probably most, thank me simply for recognizing them. I exist. I am not alone. I believe in the power of art to help break down the stigma of addiction, and I am motivated to take my art to the next level in that service. Now about my art. We see with our brains. Our eyes take in a puzzle of light, lines, and shapes, and our brains pull it together, figure out what it is, and then decide how it feels about it. Recognition, narrative, and response, probably not in that order. I am most interested in something neuroscientists call higher level ambiguity. Vermeer, we're all familiar with Vermeer's Girl with a Pearl Earring. It's the perfect example of higher level ambiguity. Vermeer has set the stage for you to complete the narrative. Is she inviting? Is she frightened? Is she innocent, pure, or seductive? Vermeer created an ambiguity that results in mutually exclusive emotional responses that at any one time to us, the viewers, seems very real and very correct. And over time, it changes. It changes with each viewing. You see the painting in the morning and you see something else. You are certain about how you feel about the painting one moment, and then later you feel differently. Now, I look to cause changes in visual perception and emotional response through methods and styles in order to create this higher level ambiguity. Starts with faces. We're attracted to faces, right? That's the first thing a baby looks at is the faces. It's in our nature. And then eyes dominate and hold your interest. So I create elevated intimacy with something I call a shared gaze. Now, I don't mean you just look at something. I mean you engage with those eyes, and that's a shared gaze. I also use iridescent and metallic paint that changes with lighting and view angle. And I frequently paint multi-views or multiple and facial features just slightly out of alignment. The faces are big, 7 feet tall. They're big, but somehow intimate. They change as you move into the painting closely, and then you move back. When you retreat, they become a different painting. Now, I know my work has an emotional impact, and it's ironic that this is something that I can influence but not control. I no longer own the painting the moment it is experienced, completed, and interpreted by you. This is your reality, born of non-linear emotional experiences, traces of the past, and mental images triggered by the cues I present you. It is a reality which goes well beyond simply observing an image. In other words, can I entice you to not only interpret my paintings as illusions of reality, but instead cause you to perceive and experience a reality of your own making. You make it real, and you will do a better job completing my painting than I can. You do it with your own perfect mental image. So my job is to give you those cues to trigger that. I want you to feel with certainty before you think. And then I want you to have new and different experiences over time, each time you recreate my portraits with your own mental image, narrative, and state of mind. I have more than 300,000 social media followers. One woman wrote and said after seeing a painting of mine online that she knew exactly that I understood how she felt. And she said she wanted to die. Next morning, she looked at the very same painting and this time saw hope in the woman's eyes. She then understood that she too could have hope. And she said to me, "You saved my life." Emma, my sister, she said that she was evil. Oh my, where did that come from? No, you're not evil. No, you're not alone. Yes, we can discuss this. Yes, we can get help. Yes, there is hope. There is hope because of all of us. I believe finding the answer to stigma and addiction will take a groundswell from artists, poets, playwrights, writers, teachers, doctors, scientists, elected officials, and all of us, all of you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bill. And now we will hear from Dr. Nora Volkow.
Good evening, everyone. It's here from Washington, D.C. It's 7:50 and it's raining outside and it's dark. And as I'm listening to Bill speak and actually making me think in terms of how extraordinary an opportunity it is to bring two of the, I think that humans do, to the activities that humans do that actually enrich our lives and save our lives. On the one hand, art, and on the other one, science. And as we're all dealing with the uncertainty, the loss of loved ones because of the COVID pandemic, I think that we've all become increasingly sensitive at how important science is, because we rely on our ability as individuals to bring together knowledge and integrating our efforts to come up with solutions. But for these actions to take place, we have to have the emotional response that goes to want to try to help others. And I think that in terms of that I find so valuable about art is that addiction is a very, very stigmatized disease, and it's very hard for people to understand it. Even if you've never had cancer, if you have someone that's suffering from cancer, immediately generates an empathy, immediately generates this sense of wanting to help. On the other hand, if someone has addiction, it basically generates rejection. And as someone, I'm a physician trained in medicine, one of the aspects that always frustrated me was, why can we not feel the same way towards compassion for someone that is addicted versus someone that has other diseases? And I thought a lot about it because it's in a way understanding that difficulty that people have on taking the science. The science has shown, and we've been able to actually identify and characterize the changes in the brain that actually lead for people, that ultimately result in people losing control and this intense desire to take the drug at the expense of things that rationally make absolutely no sense. So people lose their children, people end up in jail, people end up overdosing again and again, because the desire is so absolutely intense. And so since we're looking at it from our eyes of being in control, if we haven't been addicted, that generates a distance that is harder to bridge. And I'm always thinking, how is it that we can communicate? And I've come to realize that it's not just about communication, it's how can I make someone feel and understand what addiction is. So when I look at the images that Bill does of his sister and others, there is such a depth in understanding in that. I mean, his ability to capture that emotional depth and turmoil that exists in someone who cannot understand why they cannot control this urgent need. And just put yourself in that state of mind. You don't want to do something. I mean, you just say, I don't want to do it. And yet you cannot carry it through. You are unable to control your own self. And that generates a lot of hatred towards one's own person and dismissing and self-stigma. That is one of the hardest things to deal with for people that suffer from addiction, because they withdraw more and they become more and more dependent on drugs. So I see the value of art because it has a means to actually take the scientific knowledge and bring it into the emotional plane. So it's not only that I understand that the area of the brain, the frontal cortex, which is what allows me to focus, make decisions, and carry through. My limbic brain, which basically reacts when something is alien, which I can actually regulate with my frontal cortex. And that's why when we all get angry at someone because they insult us, we can calm ourselves down and say, no, it's not worth it. That is disrupted by drugs. So you lose that component of your brain. So if I explain it to you like that, it is extremely difficult to actually generate an insight of what it means. And my story is different from that of Bill in that the history of addiction in my family is for alcoholism on my mother's side. And my grandfather and uncle, both of them were alcoholic. I never met my grandfather because he was in Spain. And my mother had emigrated to Mexico. And so I just knew that one day there was a telegram that arrived to the house, and I heard my mother went into the room, shut the door, and started to cry. And then the next day I learned that he had died of basically that his grandfather had died, but I never knew why. And I didn't know until I was already an adult and my mother was dying from ovarian cancer that she told me, you know, my father was an alcoholic and he actually committed suicide. And I was shocked because I had been working. My mother knew that I was working in terms of the science of addiction to communicate it and treat it as a medical disease. And yet the stigma was so prevailing that she didn't even allow herself to communicate this to me. And my reaction was, what is it that I'm doing wrong? Why is it that if I say, you know, it's a disease of the brain, just like diabetes is a disease of the pancreas, why don't I generate the same reaction? Why is this not impacting on the way that people react to the disease and a willingness to help others? I think that the aspect that makes it very, very distinct is that it's much easier to understand the pancreas than it is to understand the brain. And to even understand that very simple question, why is it that certain people are vulnerable to drugs? What is in their biology that leads them to have this compulsion and vulnerability? What happened in their lives that makes them more vulnerable? And it is clear that each one of us is different. And it is clear that if we have the genetic vulnerability for addictions, it doesn't make us less than someone that doesn't have it. It gives us a different perspective in life. If we know that we have that vulnerability, we can actually be proactive to prevent situations of danger. Like it's like my case where I know that I have a family history. With that insight, you can change your own behavior. But how do then I communicate just the science about why is it that a person, most people take drugs and they never become addicted. And yet there's a person who gets exposed and then goes down the road and in some instances dies from it. We've learned a lot. We have treatments that work. We have preventions that work. They are not applied. And they are not applied for many reasons, including the fact that there are many roadblocks to bring treatments to those that need them, such as level of reimbursement. And this is stigma for the disease. We're actually not treating them the way same because there is tremendous discrimination. And something that has been very tragic to see with the COVID pandemic, you see the healthcare system saturated by the challenges of dealing with patients. That, on the one hand, can bring the best of us to try to help others, but in certain circumstances can bring also discriminative practices. And we've seen during the COVID pandemic an exacerbation of the problems that people that are taking drugs are having to deal with. And the mortality has gone off the roof. And that mortality is in part a sense of the isolations and the despair and the lack of support. As I think about all of these things and the importance of art to communicate what it feels to be addicted, to generate empathy, I also realize that the other extraordinary value of art, it gives us a group experience. It's something that we all share together. And in terms of what makes us vulnerable, what are the factors around us that make us vulnerable? One of them is the loss of feeling part of a group, of meaningful relationship. One of the most powerful things that we have as humans overall is each other. And to the extent that each other relationship becomes discriminatory, stigmatized, it actually turns from being something very positive in something very negative. And I believe that yes, science can help us understand, but we need art to help us help others feel what it is to be addicted. Thanks very much for your attention.